All right, good morning, guys. Good morning. Welcome to the Kingdom Business and Leadership Gathering. Great to see you. Feels like a lot has happened since our last gathering in December. Christmas and New Year's, and Broncos made the playoffs, and Broncos exited the playoffs. It's been a wild ride. But it's so good to be back together. I'm excited for today. Before we get to the conversation, I want to honor a couple of people who serve behind the scenes here and really help us make these gatherings possible. You know, the first person here on Thursday mornings is Jesus. He's here at 6 a.m. making coffee. You want to wave, Jesus, volunteering his time. He leaves here and he goes and does construction work. He's one of the hardest workers I've ever met. And this morning I said, Jesus, I told him, I said, Jesus, you work so hard. He goes, I'm so grateful that God he gives me strength to work. So I was like, Jesus, I want to be like you. So we thank you, Jesus. And Noah volunteers his time. He comes early to help us with AV tech. He leaves here and he's an electrical engineer. He works on satellites. He's a brilliant guy, young guy, but he comes every Thursday and volunteers his time. So I just want to publicly thank those guys for helping us out on these gatherings. It's servant leadership, isn't it? And so, well, this morning, our featured conversation is with somebody else that I would say is a servant leader. In fact, the first time I ever saw Trace Gutteridge was about 5 years ago. Trace is the owner of the Northgate Chic-fil-A, and so I love me some righteous chicken. So I'm in the drive-through line, and it was busy. There was a lot of people there. And I see Trace, even though I didn't know who he was, I recognized him as the owner of the store. He is hustling. He is running food to the cars. He is smiling. He is blessing people. And so I rolled down my window and I said, that's good leadership right there. And he was like, okay. He had no idea who I was. I had no idea who he was. And so I stand by that comment 5 years ago. I've gotten to know him. I found out, he's a new lifer, and I've gotten to know him. And I stand by that comment. He is a good leader. And so help me welcome Trace Gutteridge. Appreciate you, man. Trace, you were like, that guy is weird. Who is that? Yeah. I'm trying to work here. Hey, good morning. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah. Glad to be here.
You've had a unique journey. I mentioned this in the email, but Trace, your journey is unique in many ways because you were awarded you were one of the youngest to ever receive a Chick-fil-A store at 22 years old. And now you're 34. So 12 years later, you're about to take on your second location. So we're going to dig into that and talk about that and your life as a business owner and your life as a leader. But let's start rewinding even further. All right, let's start with your upbringing. Tell us about some of the people who shaped you as a young man. Tell us about some of the key experiences growing up that have really impacted you as a person.
Was your order accurate?
It was right on.
Okay, good.
And I got to brag on that. You know, we picked up the food at 6:30 this morning. Your staff this morning was awesome too. So
that's good. That's good. Now, I get that a lot. People think that, you know, when I'm out in the drive-through running out the orders to the customers, then it's like, man, that is just tremendous leadership. That's the best part of my job. Like as a leader and as my role has evolved, very little do I get to go rub shoulder to shoulder with the team and, you know, spend time with the customers. And so I thank you for acknowledging that. But I mean, it's something that I really enjoy to do. All right. So going back to the beginning, I guess. So I'm from Atlanta originally. Hotlanta. Couldn't wait to get out of Atlanta. That's why I'm out here in Colorado Springs. Heat, humidity, bugs. It was not a place that I wanted to live long term.
Yeah, the secret's getting out, isn't it? About Colorado Springs.
No, it is. Yeah, actually, a bunch of the Chick-fil-A guys out here are from Atlanta now. Yeah, if you can believe it. But grew up in a Christian home. Had the best parents that you could ever ask for. I have a brother who's actually also with Chick-fil-A. He owns a restaurant in Dallas, Texas. Both of my parents actually met at Chick-fil-A. So they were working at the corporate office. Dad was a business consultant, which basically meant that he was gone from Monday night through Thursday night, traveling across the country to speak with people like myself, operators, to act as the liaison between us and the support center. Mom was responsible for opening new restaurants. And so when she had my brother, she said, hey, 2 kids is enough. I think I'm going to be done with doing Chick-fil-A. So she stopped, and Dad obviously continued. And so as I was getting of age, at 16 years old, and, just like most 16-year-old kids, you need a job to go to the movies or to pay for gas, et cetera. I did not want to go work for Chick-fil-A because I was kind of like most other kids. It's like, I don't want to follow my parents' footsteps, but I figured that'd be the easiest place to get an interview and accepted. And so went to Chick-fil-A, and I actually got hired on the same day my wife did. And so we had orientation together. We got hired on the same day. It took me 3 months to get the courage to ask her to go out with me, but we've been together for 17 years, so ever since we were kids.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Isn't that wild? Your parents met at Chick-fil-A, and you met your wife at Chick-fil-A. That is crazy.
And their career was Chick-fil-A, and my career was Chick-fil-A, yeah. So finished up my time. Actually, when I started, I think I told you, it's like I didn't want to do Chick-fil-A to start, but the moment I got indoctrinated with the culture and was able to see how I could develop systems and processes to make an organization better, I was hooked, man. I was in love. My only experience of a career, though, with Chick-fil-A was what my dad did, gone Monday through Thursday. And although the best father a man could ask for was not what I wanted to do as a father, right? And so when this new role came open to me, or I was made aware of, the operator role, that I could own a Chick-fil-A, stay in, in the same house with my kids, that was something I was interested in. So went to Auburn University and studied human resource management, because that's kind of what I do now, is manage a team, and graduated, went back to work for the operator that I started my career with, running both of his Chick-fil-A's, and then very shortly after applied to become an operator. And I think I want to make sure that that's clear. The franchise model with Chick-fil-A is very different than most other franchise models. I see some head nods, so y'all are aware of it, I guess. But most franchise models require a bunch of capital. You go and you bring money to the table, and they're like, okay, yeah, where do you want to put your McDonald's, or where do you want to put it? You got to build the facility, furnish the equipment, et cetera. Chick-fil-A is very different, so it only requires a $5,000 buy-in. And the catch, I guess, is that 90,000 people apply every year for it. And so they select about 150, but it's more of a rigorous interview process for selection of the business partner that they want to go into business with long term. Then, hey, you have some wealth, you're looking to diversify your portfolio, sure, you can join this franchise model.
So it's so competitive. I'm just curious. You're 22 years old. You have 90,000 people applying. Why did they choose you?
Can you believe it? Yeah.
Did that shock you, first of all?
It didn't, but it was actually something I wrestled with for a long time. If I can be vulnerable, I constantly wondered, did I get this because of my parents? Did I get this because of Dad, right? Who was still in the business at the time. And the last thing I wanted was to be handed something. I'd rather the opportunity to go and work for it. But looking back, as a 22-year-old kid, handed the keys to a multi-million-dollar restaurant, is very shocking that they would choose to give it to me.
Yeah, say more about that. What kind of a leader were you at 22? And here you are at 34. How have you grown over the last 12 years?
Yeah. Well, at 22, you don't have many life experiences yet, right? You just finished high school and college. And so the people that you have that are pouring into you are not very many. And so I had my operator, the guy I worked for, who I think really laid a foundation of the way I began running my restaurant. But like most of us who maybe have experienced time working for other people, the list of all of the amazing things that you learn from them is just as long as the list of all the amazing things that you want to make sure you don't, incorporate when you actually have the keys. And so he really helped me understand how to run an effective, clean business and the power of leadership, right? And the importance of making sure that you're developing yourself and your team. So that's kind of the way I began my journey. And it was supplemented by the drive that Mom taught me, right? So Mom was the one who kept on pushing me to be the best that I could be, when I was a kid. And she would have this saying that as I was going through with school, she would say, hey, Trace, if you make A's, you live an A lifestyle. B's, you live a B lifestyle, and we don't make C's in this in this household. And so literally, like I call it tablet time because I got kids, but like my screen time was based off of the performance that I did at school. My time having a chores or an allowance was based off of how well I performed at school. And so at an early age, she really instilled this drive into me. And here comes Dad, on Thursday nights, and he sees this like Mustang, right? He was just like, okay, well, great, we got drive, but you need to have purpose, right? Drive without purpose, going in a specific direction is trouble, right? And so he's the one who really began to mentor me of like, hey, let's define the why. Let's define like what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so as a 22-year-old kid, those are the three people that I have kind of influencing the decisions that I'm making. And it started off like, okay, I got a little chip on my shoulder. I got to prove to the world that I got selected for this opportunity, not because of my father. Yeah. And so was working just ridiculous hours and kind of carried the business. Not spending the time developing people, definitely not spending the time trying to retain them. It was just, hey, how can I run the most profitable, successful business? Because I need to prove, that I actually had the ability to do that. But that the fourth person who impacted me is my wife. Right, so she's the other person that I've spent a lot of time with as a 16-year-old kid and meeting her. And she's the one who has evolved me into the leader that I am today, right? So she was the one who encouraged me. She said, hey, Trace, the destination that you're going for, whatever it is that you are pursuing, right, with the purpose and the drive that Mom and Dad have given you, it's not worth getting there if you get there alone.
Yeah. And I can see that moves you. Even reflecting on that. And so that is powerful. Let's talk about your faith, because you're very honoring of your parents and you talk about growing up in a Christian home. But was there a time in your life when you decided, I can't just say I'm a Christian because I grew up in a Christian home. I need to own this. I need to follow Jesus myself. What did that journey look like for you?
No, there wasn't. I never remember a time that I didn't know the Lord. It's one of the things that I think my parents did an amazing job with stewarding my relationship with God. Now, that relationship would ebb and flow as I got older. My discipline of, spending time with Him and trying to foster that, would, as I said, ebb and flow. But there was never a time I didn't know the Lord. And when you're in high school and you're going to youth group and you have these conversations with other kids, it was a touchy subject for me because a lot of them had these cool, miraculous testimonies, and here I am when it came my turn to say, hey, my testimony, it's just like, hey, He's always been there, man. He's always been somebody that I've known and relied on. And just like my father from birth, he's been the guy that is with me throughout everything. And so it was an insecure time for me as well when that was going through, that I had to kind of wrestle with the fact that I didn't have that miraculous testimony. However, I think it's one of the best gifts a parent can give their kids.
Well, I know you are very intentional of the way that you're fathering your kids. And one of the things that was so apparent to me early on in getting to know you is how important your family is to you. But you've also been open about the challenges that you and your wife have had to navigate. Would you be open to talking about some of the challenges and what you've learned as a dad?
Yeah. You'll have to bear with me. This is a very touchy subject, and I'm an emotional man when it comes to it. But the Lord has been so good to me and my family. I mean, just the blessings that he has provided is just, it's so fun to look back and to reflect on and even to live. I told you, never knowing a time that you don't know the Lord and Savior, I mean, that's just a great starting point. Then you get into the field of what you're going to call a career at a 16-year-old age, supplemented by you find this beautiful woman that says yes, that's going to be with you for the rest of your life at 16 years old. Graduate, you go to Auburn University, and because you had parents that really cared for you, they paid for your college tuition, they gave you the drive. I ended up I was the valedictorian of the business school at Auburn. I started my career with Chic-fil-A at 22 years old. And ended up, winning another accolade called Rookie of the Year, which again, I needed to affirm that I got that role without, Dad's, influence. And so the Lord was just blessing after blessing after blessing. And at this time, my wife and I, we felt like the Lord was telling us something's coming. Something's coming. We didn't know what it was. But it's scary to hear that, right? And so she was being told from the Lord, I was being told, hey, just prepare your heart. Something is coming. And so fast forward 3 years, we get selected for this Northgate location up at Chick-fil-A up here. And we decide, hey, okay, so we've got roots now. Like we've got what we call a freestanding restaurant in our industry, which is a little bit higher volume than a mall restaurant. Like let's start trying to have kids. And so we got to try for a week. We were that successful. So it wasn't much of trying that occurred, but we got pregnant. Again, another just ridiculous blessing to be able to get pregnant and to not have to struggle for a long time to do so. And I remember there was one day my wife came into the restaurant. It was right before we were going to go visit the doctor to have the first ultrasound. And she says, hey, Trace, I got to talk to you. And I said, okay, yeah, is everything okay? Like, is the baby all right? And she said, oh, yeah, the baby's fine. But I just want to let you know we're having twins, is what she said, right? And I'm like, well, baby, that's the whole point of the visit tomorrow. I guess for us to actually, look at the baby and, see what's going on and all that stuff. She's like, I'm just warning you that we have twins. I said, okay. Great. I mean, we'll deal with that. And part of me is kind of like, okay, well, that's one deductible, that's one hospital stay. That's there's a lot of good that's going to come out of this, right? So that's not that bad. But we go into the OBGYN's office, and the doctor's doing her thing, and then she's like, okay, Dad, well, it looks like you're having twins. And I was like, yeah, she told me yesterday. And the OB is looking at me like, oh, I've never gotten that experience as well. And she's like, well, I guess I should start looking to make sure there's not a third. Right? And at that point, she got the reaction that she was looking for, ghost white, pass out basically against the wall, because the idea of having triplets would just be insane. But anyways, twins are hard, and so I don't know if anybody in this room has any experience with twins or supporting somebody who does, but there's a lot of challenges that come with twins. And we had 35 ultrasounds just due to the type of twins that we have, where they share a lot of resources, and you worry that there's going to be, one that takes the resources from the other. But they ended up coming out healthy, and so they were born premature, 5 months early. But we had a month-long NICU stay and were released, and everything again seemed good. Fast forward a couple of years, because I don't really remember them because I wasn't sleeping very much. Again, did the twins thing, and we don't have any support network out here besides just friends. And my twins aren't talking, right? So they're look totally fine. They're totally mobile. They're beautiful babies, but I think twins automatically get a kind of etch up on the cute factor just because there's two of them. But they weren't talking. And everybody that I had spoken with who had an interaction with twins in the past had said, hey, don't worry about that. That's not a big deal. Oftentimes twins will speak for one another. They have their own language. It's not an issue. And so I kind of leaned on that feedback and was trying to find solace in that. And so we finally get to the age where the twins get to go to preschool. And there's a church that we, were aware of that had a great preschool program. And so we went and enrolled them into the preschool. And so we had the celebratory moment of them going off and enjoying that part of their life. But it wasn't 3 days. It was only 3 days after the time that they began preschool where the church called and told us that our kids were getting kicked out. Again, they weren't speaking, and they were rambunctious like a lot of boys are, but they weren't speaking, and so they just could not feel like they could lead those kids, and they were looking at the greater whole, saying that this is probably not going to be a good fit for them to stay here. They insinuated that we should consider getting our kids assessed for mental illness, and I totally agreed that we should at least get clarity on that role, on that outcome, but that's a hard process to go through. I mean, as a parent, to admit that your kid, may have a disability, but in addition, even just the path to get diagnosed is cumbersome. It's long, it's hard. We eventually do get the diagnosis and come to find out that one of my children has autism. One of the twins has autism. The other one is not far enough on the spectrum to call autism, and so instead they just diagnosed him with ADHD. Again, hard to hear, but I thought that I should tell the current church that we were going to, again, different than the school that we had sent them to, but we were going to church every Sunday, that it's like, hey, let me go ahead and tell them the diagnosis so that they're aware of it, because I would want to know. And it wasn't 2 weeks after I told them that we get called in by the student ministries and told that our children are not welcome. And again, it's because of the resources that they just couldn't communicate with the twins, and that we're welcome to continue to visit the church, but the children would have to sit with us in the service. And I didn't want to keep doing that. I didn't feel loved. And at this time, I was mad. Yeah, I got angry, and I wasn't angry at either of the churches because they're doing their thing, right? I mean, it's not, who am I to tell them how to run their businesses, their organizations? But I was pissed at God. I was mad, and I think what I was so angry was I knew that this was coming, right? I knew we had this. He was letting us know that chimes were going to change. And I kind of just assumed it would happen to me. And it broke my heart when it happened to my kid, right? And it was just, it's like, God, do your worst to me. Leave my son alone, right? Leave my son alone. And I went into a dark, dark phase about a year and a half of just hating God. Hating him. Now, never gave up on the relationship with him, meaning it's like I wasn't praying. I wasn't, speaking about it at the house. We didn't talk about God at work anymore. I wasn't helping the teenagers that I get to work with on a regular basis, understand their testimony and really kind of solidify that as they go off into college. Like all of the great stuff that I had because of the foundation my parents had laid was gone. But he's still family, right? I mean, it was still this time where it's like, I know he's there and I know he cares, but I'm gonna put you at distance, right? We had a bad Thanksgiving, I'm not gonna talk to you till the next Thanksgiving kind of thing, right? But I was mad. And I started telling people who had the courage to ask about Ari. Ari's the one with autism. I started telling people who had the courage to ask, it's like, hey, I cannot wait to get to heaven so that I can finally have a conversation with my son. Because at that time, he maybe knew 10 words. Now, thank God, one of them was, I love you, right? I mean, and so there's so many parents who have kids on the spectrum who don't ever get to hear their kids speak, And so it's like, I have heard dad, we had heard mom, and I love you, because he hears those words all the time, right? But at this time, he wasn't speaking, right? And I was just livid with God. But I could not wait to get to heaven so I could finally have a conversation with him. And as I'm processing my grief through anger, my wife is doing the complete opposite. She is just like getting so devoted to the Lord, and it would just frustrate me because, she would want to pray and she would want to have conversations, and I was just like, I know I'm not in the headspace to do so. But one date night that we went to after the diagnosis, she said something to me that just really rocked me. She said, Trace, our perception of normal is not God's version of perfect, is what she said. And I was like, hey, stop. I'm going to write this down because that is really, really good. And as much as I don't want to hear it, that is primo stuff, right? And so I wrote it down. And then very shortly after, we both decided to get tattoos about autism. So we both have puzzle pieces on our bodies, which illustrates autism. And then I have the quote that she said on my arm as well, because it was just so impactful, even though I was still in the midst of anger with the Lord. Shortly after that, my parents come over, and you may have garnered just from the kind of parents that I just gave you as an upbringing. They didn't like tattoos. That was not a big thing in our household. Dad was very clear. He's like, if you get a tattoo, you switch places with the dog. The dog doesn't have a bed. The dog doesn't get an inheritance. Those he was very clear about that. And so it was a big deal, that I had a tattoo and that they were coming over here, and we didn't tell them ahead of time that it was happening. We're not going to hide it because it's an important part of who we are. And so he's down there, and he comes over, and then me and him go down into the basement. We're playing with Ari and Jet. Those are my two twins, and he obviously sees the tattoos. He asked briefly about them, and I tell him the quote that Akela had told me, and then again I reiterated, Dad, I cannot wait to get to heaven so that I can finally have a conversation with my son. And he knows how angry I am. I mean, he knows, that the last year and a half has been hard because he obviously knew about the diagnosis. And he stopped, processed that, and then he looked at me and he said, Trace, we've got to get Ari to heaven first, is what he said. And that just wrecked me because what I realized was the greatest gift that my parents had given me was that I never knew a time that I didn't know the Father. And here I am with a son at a young age, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure he doesn't have a relationship with the Father, right? And it was so eye-opening to me. And I wised up. And Akela encouraged us to go to New Life. And the reason that we chose to come to New Life is because, I don't know if any of y'all know this, but there's 2 sensory rooms that New Life has at their disposal. One is for kids that need dim lights because they're overwhelmed. And another one is for sensory kids that get really excited and need to go burn off some energy. And in addition, the volunteers that I have interacted with have all had some form of at least conversation about how to manage that when children's become dysregulated. And so New Life felt like it would be a church that would finally support us in this journey. And so we ended up coming to New Life, and I fought tooth and nail to come here, obviously because of the anger piece, but secondarily, another thing that has happened to me with churches is that we've been burned personally and professionally with churches, because when they find out that I own a Chic-fil-A, there's a lot of synergy there, and it turns into well, hey, we got this youth group event going here, and then we got men's group, and then we got, and next thing you know, the giving that I was able to do, generously, and was now an obligation. And New Life spends a lot of money on chicken. and so I was very hesitant to come to New Life for the concern that we would have that same obligation.
And that's one of the things I told Trace early on, because he was vulnerable and he was sharing about this. I said, Trace, first of all, we'll never take your chicken. We'll never accept free chicken. So let's just put that on the table. But Trace, that moves me, hearing you share vulnerably. I can just feel your heart as a dad. And a couple things stand out about that. Number one is you were really angry with God. And that's okay. And I want to just say that to you, like if you get burned in a business deal, or if you're navigating a season where you're feeling angry, it's okay. God doesn't shun us when we get angry at him. His arms remain open, and he's patient, and he's kind, and he's tender, and he's with us in that. And I think the invitation is always, hey, take those hard emotions, take that anger, bring it to me. Come to me right as you are. And so your dad helped you with that, right? That was a sobering conversation where your dad helped you look honestly at your life and realize, oh, I'm not living out my faith in a way that my son might even catch that. And so I just think that's an important part of your story, is you were willing to look honestly at your life, and in the anger still come back to the Lord. And so anything you'd want to share about what you learned about God's nature in that process, that as you kind of returned to him with that anger?
Again, this was my first turmoil. It was the first time I had something hard, and I now don't shy away from moments where I am uncomfortable or disturbed or put into moments that just don't feel right, because I know that the Lord is with me. And so for any of you who are going through those tough times, if you're willing to take a moment to reflect after you get through the grief or through the hard times that you're going through, I think it's become so obvious God's presence in that story. And I would even say that during the good times too as well. Like, if what I learned from it, I think the most, was to take the time to reflect on God's impact.
That's very good. Let's pivot a little bit. We've got just a little bit of time left, but let's talk more about, you mentioned earlier how you fell in love with Chick-fil-A's culture. And it's something Chick-fil-A is known for, right? Is joyful service. The employees serve and say, my pleasure, and they're smiling, and it at least seems like they're happy to be at work. Talk to us about how you, as the business owner, work to try to create a culture of joy at work. What do you do? What have you found this worked well in that regard?
Yeah, it goes back to our vision for the restaurant, and our vision is to impact stories. And we believe there's two different stories that we're trying to impact. The obvious one is the guest, the customer, right? And everybody who comes into our restaurant has a story. You don't know whether or not their son was just diagnosed with autism. You don't know whether or not they just got married. You don't know whether they're going through a good or a bad time, but everybody would appreciate a smile, right? Everybody appreciates, somebody who's being attentive to their needs. And so you lead initially with the guest story, but the behind the scenes, I think, is where the magic happens. And that's the team member story that we're really passionate about. Growing up in the business, as a 16-year-old kid, I had a boss that took a risk on me, right? I mean, he gave me a job, and then he gave me responsibility at such an early age. And I really try to replicate that with the team members that we get to employ. We take on team members that are ridiculously busy with their extracurricular activities or their, college endeavors, et cetera, that most other businesses wouldn't touch because their return on them it's not there. But we're willing to invest time and effort in them, allow them to experience a safe work culture. And then a personal passion of me, for me, is that anybody who wants to experience leadership gets an opportunity. And I think that is paramount to our long-term success, because these kids, as a 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, most of which are the ones I'm hiring, they're about to begin their college career. And often, as a 16, 17, and 18-year-old, you crave leadership. Like, you want to be in charge because that's where the money is, that's where the accolades are, et cetera. And I want them to be able to experience that before they go get a career that would push them that way. Because once you experience leadership, and now you're having to hold team members accountable, now you're having to delegate to your friends, now you're the one getting yelled at by an angry customer, it's like, I don't know if this is actually the route that I'm feeling led to continue on, right? And so our intentionality in impacting that team member story, I think, is important. And a personal belief of mine, my men's group knows this, but my personal belief of mine is that encouragement is the most powerful leadership tool that you have at your disposal. And nobody gets too much encouragement. Nobody gets too much encouragement. And so we do a very good job on our digital platforms of acknowledging and encouraging people in what we call a shout out on a daily thing. And so when we assess our daily metrics, our daily numbers, you have, okay, well, how fast were we for our customer? How good was the food? How many times do we encourage other team members? And so we take encouragement to the next level, which I think just shows itself to the guests when they come in.
I really like that, focusing on your team members have a story. They're not just an employee who shows up to punch. They have a story. There's purpose in their life. And the second thing that you said I think is really worth highlighting is encouragement is the most powerful leadership tool. I think that's really rich. Here's the last question. You've got 200 employees at the Northgate location. You're about to take over another location in town, so another 200. So soon you're going to have about 400 employees. How do you organize your time? You're one person, you have limited time, limited resources. How do you go about a typical day and decide what you're going to work on, what's going to get your attention, and what you're going to delegate to others?
My man, Russell Verhey, I don't know where he is.
Yep, right in the back.
He was my executive coach about 5 or 6 years ago, and he helped me solve this problem. I was always at the restaurant. So I had in my mind that if I wanted to be available for my team, I need to constantly be at the restaurant. And so I was there ridiculous hours, and I would be there for the point of, hey, if a team member needed to speak, there I was in the dining room. If a customer needed to come and talk to me, there I was in the dining room and available. And what Russell really taught me, one of the best aha moments of my professional career, was being available doesn't mean that you're present. And we see that oftentimes, when you go home and you're at dinner with your family, right? And you're there, but you're not present, right? Because you're thinking about work or whatever else. And I was doing the same thing at work. I was going in to try to be available, and I wasn't present for those that really wanted my time. And so I rearranged what Russell and I both called this kind of rhythm of our life, right? And that began with getting sleep correct. And so I go to bed very, very early at night, and then I wake up pretty early in the morning and begin my day with about 30 minutes with quiet time with the Lord, and then about an hour of work before what I like to call the whirlwind happens. And that's when everybody's getting up and you got to get the kids ready for school, right? And so before that even starts, I've been productive with my day. And then I get the opportunity to take my kids to school, which I didn't really have from my father when I was growing up. And after that, I've also learned the importance of exercise and taking care of myself physically, because if I'm not taking care of myself personally, I've got no right to try to lead others professionally. And so then I go into the gym immediately after, and my first meeting usually doesn't start till 10 a.m. Because I'll drop the kids off and then go to the gym and have kind of that time alone, if you will, and then begin and prioritize my day accordingly. And what I found in terms of prioritization, I think that's as well part of the question, is focus on the small wins, right? So at times leaders like to go solve the big strategic problems, right? Let me take on, how we're going to completely revamp, again, in my world, the bagging scheme, like how we do our normal operations. But what has the most impact on both the team members and oftentimes the guest is not you revamping something major, it's you doing slight wins, small adjustments. And so when I'm looking at my to-do list, those are the things that I prioritize and then transition into something that, is a little bit more fun to work on.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's so obvious to me is, yes, you have had unique experiences at a young age, but you didn't approach it from a John Wayne mentality. Here we go. This is me. You intentionally opened yourself up to the counsel and mentoring of other people. Russell being one of them. So to the young guys in the room, I think that's really important, to be intentional, to open yourself up, to let older, wiser people pour into you. And so, Trace, thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing.
Pleasure.
Thank you for being honest and vulnerable. Can we thank Trace for his wisdom? And would you open up your hands? I just want to pray a blessing over you as you prepare to go into your Thursday. Father, I thank you for the reality that you know every one of these men, they're your sons. You've adopted them through Jesus as sons, and they carry your spirit into their Thursday. Into the office with them you go. So may we all have ears to hear your voice today. May we keep in step with your spirit. Give us courage to follow you intimately today. In Jesus' name. And everybody says, amen. Hey, a couple things, just 30 seconds real quickly. So thanks for being flexible on the date. We had a conflict in January, so we had to move this, of course, to the third Thursday. We're back to the second Thursday in February, and we're going to have Jerry White join us. Jerry is an amazing man. He's in his 80s. Fascinating story. He's a retired major general, taught astronautics at the Air Force Academy for many years. He's an author, so very decorated military officer. Then he transitioned to become the president of the Navigators, and for 16 years, he led the Navigators. And his passion, you know what his primary passion is? The theology of work, viewing work from a kingdom perspective. And so it's going to be really good. So join us February 13th. Jerry White's going to be with us. Also in February, we're going to have a men's conference. We do this twice a year. And so February 20th and 27th, back-to-back Thursday nights, we're going to gather in the theater. These are some of my favorite nights. It's powerful. We'll have hundreds of guys, and the presence of the Lord is going to move. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a really good opportunity to also just connect with more guys, our fire team leaders. And the theme this year is empowered. We're going to be talking about, hey, on an everyday basis, how do we live an empowered life? Not going about life in our own strength, trying to make everything work by our own power, but how do we day-to-day tap into the power of the Holy Spirit? And so that's going to be February 20th and 27th. And on each table, there's a QR code. You can register. It takes about 10 seconds. All right. Hey, thanks for coming. Thanks again, Trace. God bless you. We'll see you very soon. All right. Go in peace.